Go. Hello, hello. Welcome to the February 20th DEI Careers Panel. My name is Andrea G. Tatum. Thank you all so much for being here with us today. I'm so excited. I see you all are rolling in already. I've also got our YouTube live going today. So thanks to anybody who is tuning in on the YouTube live. If you see me do one of these, that's how you know I'm like paying attention to what's going on at YouTube. I am trying to also be all the things. So today I am tech, I am moderator, and that's the fun part of doing all of this. I do want to let people know as you all are coming in, we do have closed captioning today. So hopefully you're able to see that and you can turn that off or on as you feel the need. If you are on the webinar, you should be able to see that. And it looks like you are able to see it on the YouTube as well. So with that, I want to just dive right in. Feel free to say hello in the chat. Tell us your name, tell us where you're joining us from. My name is Andrea G. Tatum. I am excited to have my panelist here with me today. I started AGT Diversity Consulting because I found so many people asking questions about what does it mean to work in DEI or how can I get started in this field? And I realized that there wasn't a ton of information about what it means to actually do the work. So I started this with the idea that I would be able to help shed a little light on what it means to be a DEI practitioner, knowing that there are so many different avenues into this field. I actually got my start in this world with no DEI title whatsoever. My career actually started in the nonprofit arts. I was a marketer, and I have spent a large portion of my career doing marketing and event planning. And even though that was my job, was to really just sell tickets, get butts and seats to come to those performances, I knew that it was never enough. I always wanted to kind of go the extra mile and think about who was actually attending those performances. How were they able to get access? How are we even really showing off the place where we were hosting in terms of like, where were we placing our marketing so that different people knew? And then I finally got even more confident along the way and started asking questions about like, how do we determine what goes on the stage, or whose art are we actually showcasing, and how do we get more people of color's work onto the stages? So that is really where I started this career. And then fast forward, moved to the Bay Area. I'm originally from Nashville, lived in Atlanta, living in the Bay Area now. And like so many other people, decided I wanted to work in tech. And as soon as I started working in tech, I immediately realized there was a lack of diversity there as well. And I found ways from within my own sphere of influence to be able to have an impact and to really drive the conversation around diversity and inclusion, and eventually wrote my own job description, handed it to the head of talent at Tableau and said, here's all the skills that I have. I'm a certified project manager. I am an international event planner. I am a skilled marketer. I am all of these things. Let me help us to think about how we acquire talent from diverse backgrounds. Let me help you think about how do we, showcase ourselves on our website and all of these different things. So that's a little bit about me. And today I am going to have my panelists tell you a little bit about their journeys into this career as well. I will do my best to monitor the chat, but we'll try to save some questions towards the end. So with that, I would like to welcome Rona to the stage. And Rona, why don't you tell us a little bit about your career journey?
Yeah, thank you so much. And I just want to say to everybody who's here, there is a place for you, a very important place for you somewhere in this world. And so I just really want to start with encouraging you to pursue this and to figure out where you fit in. There's so much that needs to be done. And so, your presence is a bonus. And so I just hope that nobody is like, oh, I don't have this qualification or that experience. I think that, being a human qualifies you quite a long way, at least to get started. So to share a little bit about my own career path, my story really starts from a very young age when my grandparents, actually 3 of them, were Holocaust survivors. So I was always very keenly aware of human potential. And as I got older, just got more and more curious about what would the world be like if everybody was actually reaching towards their own self-actualization, both individuals and organizations. So my career journey is really a story of finding my place and how do I help to create that. So similar to Andrea, I actually started out in the arts. So I studied social change and anthropology in school. I went into the arts, and that's where I realized there's this whole field, called human resources, culture, talent, organizational development. And I thought, wow, that seems like a way that I would be really kind of tangible and helpful, where I can focus on an organization that actually has broader impacts in society. That felt like the right sort of way to chew off my piece of the work. So I went to work at Dolby, where I got a Dolby Laboratories, where I got to have experience across various parts of HR. And as I like to say to them at the time, I wanted to just scoot my desk an inch closer every day towards where the team that focuses purely on sort of like culture and talent development was sitting. And that's when I really discovered how much is there in terms of how we can help employees to be their best selves, to do their best work, and for the organization to thrive. From there, I discovered that diversity and inclusion, as it was then called, is a field. And I went to work at Gap Inc. And as you may know, that's, Gap, Banana Republic, Old Navy, and other brands. So I got to have the experience of being a global program manager and learn more about how these different issues were manifesting in different parts of the world. After that, I was interested in entrepreneurship after being at such a large company. I thought, what would it be like to do my own? So I did coaching for emerging leaders from underrepresented background, as well as consulting for startup technologies that were about enhancing culture and connectedness at work. At that point, I got a phone call from Dolby asking me to come back and to work in their diversity and inclusion field there. And that's where I am today, as I'm slowly expanding my scope of work to, culture change on the widest scale that I'm able to do. So that's a little bit about how I got to where I am.
I love it. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us, Rona. I'm going to jump right over to Javier and have him share his story with you as well.
Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon for some, and maybe some good evening wherever you're watching, wherever you're tuning in from. I just want to start out by saying that my heart and prayers with Texas, Louisiana, and Oklahoma for our citizens and residents out in those states due to the devastating natural disasters that they're experiencing, water shortages, power shortages. So if you are all tuning in from there, and or if you have family and friends and loved ones out there, please, my heart and prayers is with them. And then second, I also wanted to for my Asian American brothers and sisters, Pacific Islander brothers and sisters, if you are all out there experiencing some type of prejudice and or hate and or other acts of aggression, please, my heart's and prayers with you all, because that's very personal to me. So I just wanted to start off by just addressing everything going on in society, so that we're not ignoring that in our conversation, because we know that in order to address things, it has to be intersectional actions taken from communities together. It doesn't just depend on one community to take care of those issues. So that's what I wanted to start with. And then, so my name is Javier. I use he, him, his pronouns. I served in the military for 5 years after high school, transitioned out, went to community college in San Diego, transferred to a four-year university up here in the Bay Area. completed my undergrad and had an opportunity to work in tech. I was fortunate enough to meet my first hiring manager while I was a student at Berkeley, and going through those information session nights. I'm not sure if you all are in college or if you all went to the Career Center during your time in college, but I would highly recommend going to the Career Center, or at least engaging the Career Center. Now that we're in a pandemic, we can only do it digitally. But yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunities for you there to meet alumni and get the resources you need to start on your career journey. So that's where I started, at the Career Center, right? Post-military service, transitioning to higher education, trying to find an internship or opportunity in college and after college, right? So I want to, if Lisa Lee is listening to this, I just want to thank her. She's a VP at DoorDash now, but I just want to thank her for giving me the opportunity to work at Pandora Music in Oakland. And then from there, I was exposed to a lot of different opportunities on the D&I team at Pandora, as well as the university recruiting team. So it was a really special blend, very special culture, very intimate culture at Pandora, just because we were such a smaller company. So I got to work collaboratively with a lot of different departments in Oakland, right, and in the other offices too. But yeah, so that experience, being almost a year at Pandora, and also networking in while I was in college and even after college, helped me transition and have built and nurtured relationships with other people in my network that introduced me to an opportunity at ServiceNow. So that's what led me from Pandora Music to ServiceNow in the Bay Area. And yeah, just like Rona said, there's a place for you in this journey. I'm happy to share more, but I'll just keep it at that for now. Thank you. Go Bears. Whoever said that.
Yeah, I was say I saw Go Bears, and thank you for the acknowledgement that you gave. I absolutely second that, and thoughts are with everybody who, there's a lot going on in the world, and we'll talk about this a little bit. I mean, this work is so deeply personal. We are all going through a lot at any given time, even in our own lives, and trying to just make this world a better place, especially within workplaces, but there's so much more to that. So thank you for that acknowledgement, Javier. And do you want to just quickly tell us, I mean, because it's such a gorgeous background, I'm sure people would love to know, tell us a little bit about what you've got as your background there.
Yeah, for sure. This is an art painting. I forgot the name of the artist, but you can definitely Google it, Yuri Kochiyama and Malcolm X. Yuri Kochiyama is a civil rights leader as well as Malcolm X, but Yuri Kochiyama, she, specifically in the Bay Area, she united a lot of Asian American communities to during the civil rights movement, even before the civil rights movement, right? But during the civil rights movement, it really accelerated, and she had a friendship with Malcolm X, right? She followed Malcolm X and learned from his teachings, from his movement, from his teachings, right? So, and Yuri, if you studied or if you have heard or read about, researched about Yuri Kochiyama and the relationship and what she did for the Asian American community, but communities of color, they were really in tandem, Yuri and Malcolm X. And as a matter of fact, Yuri was there when Malcolm X was shot, and she was one of the first people on stage to help triage Malcolm. So this is very deeply personal to me because in the Asian American community, we want to be there for our Black brothers and sisters, as well as we hope and expect them to be there for us when any communities of color are going through a struggle, right? And are persevering through these times. So I am reminded with them about their intersectional actions that they took during their times during the civil rights movement.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that with us, Javier. And last but not least, I'm excited to have Brandi come on and tell us about her journey into this. And, you know, Brandi and I got connected. And I just have to tell this because we both have this relationship with Nashville and Tennessee. And, you know, so I am really excited. I mean, Rona, Javier, and I are all kind of Bay Area based, but like I said, I'm a Nashville native, and Brandi is joining us not from the Bay Area. So I'm gonna let her tell you all about her story.
And I'm so glad that you gave me that cool introduction, because I think Hank sort of alluded to this in the chat. You know, diversity is just more than race. It's about all those things that make us who we are. So from a geographical standpoint, I bring you greetings from Charlotte, North Carolina. I am a Arkansas, Tennessee girl in the North Carolina world. I am so happy to be with you all today. And I want to start off by saying, Javier, thank you for your service. I am a proud Air Force military spouse. So the military is very near and dear to me. Before I get started to tell you all about my journey, I want to sort of walk you through my why I do what I do, because that's going to sort of lead into how I got to where I got. So my background in life was a little bit different. I actually had the distinct pleasure of being raised by two amazing individuals, my grandparents. Everywhere I went, I always had the oldest parents. My mom had me extremely early, very early. So it was either the youngest parent or the oldest parent. My granddad was disabled, so he actually stayed home with me. He was the one that did the cleaning. He was the one that did the dishes. He was the one that picked me up from the bus stop. So I learned role reversal very early on. My house was the house that everybody always came to get paperwork filled out. My grandparents, I think I took my first vote at 4. Every election we voted, I was there. We were the people that took people to the precincts to vote. We were the people to register people to vote. So I tell people my social activism started very early, and I used to complain. I would cry to my grandmother, who I called my big mom. I called my big mama, and I would say, why do we do this? And she would say to me, I'm doing this so that when you get older and be my age, the world will be a better place for you. And it's like now 2020, I'm saying the same thing to my 18-year-old about the stories that I used to have with her. So flash forward, I go to school, first gen everything. I was raised that I was just as good as anybody else. I had to work harder than everybody else, but I deserved my place of whatever I chose to be because I worked hard. So I kept that in my mind in every position that I had. Underdog. Every role I had, youngest person, only person of color, underdog. And for me, I think I naturally began to fight for the underdog because the underdog was me, because I understood I understood what it looked like to not be privileged. So I think in a natural standpoint, I began in my jobs to start to advocate for people who I felt were getting a disservice. When everybody wanted to talk about something that was happening at the job, they went to me. I could communicate well because I was a communications manager. I could put together presentations very well. And then I also had really, really strong influence skills. So I was at Bank of America. I was in HR. I was doing diversity work back when they called it culture. I started at a company by the name of Assurian. I was an HR VP there. They said, Brandi, would you design a culture program? I didn't really know what that was at the time. For me, I went to an HBCU, so everyone there was African American. And then for me to get out in the workforce, it was very different. I went from an environment where everybody was so cultivating and loving to a place where people looked at me as if I didn't exist. So taking those skills, knowing those things, as I went to each role, I found an executive and he reached out to me and he said, if you want to move up, you have to have passion for what you're doing. You need exposure and you need visibility. So what I did was I actually joined a volunteerism group at my job. And those of you who work in corporations or even manufacturing facilities, you may have these volunteer groups. At my company, we call them Bank of America volunteers. They would go out and they would do work within the community. Well, I started to do that. I started to put together events. I started to bring people together. I started to create engagement opportunities for our Bank of America employees. Little did I know, I got myself put on a hypo list, and they created a role for diversity and inclusion consultant, and I got actually placed into the role. I interviewed and got the role. So that was sort of how I started my foray into diversity and inclusion. And from there, I went to running ERGs. From there, I went to be a diversity chief of staff. And from there, I went to be a head of a D&I for a tech line of business. So my niche is diversity and technology. That's something that I'm extremely passionate about. Everybody is giving you all really, really good advice. So my thing that I'm going to leave you with from me is that passion cannot be taught. You either have it or you don't, and that you are your own competition. So if you want to do this, you can. And if you do it well, people will notice. And I'll turn it back over to you, Andrea.
Thank you. That was so awesome. Thank you for sharing that. You know, it's so interesting. You talked about how, you know, you basically got all of this exposure, that you were kind of going out of your way to get visibility as you were going throughout your career. And I thought that that was so interesting, because I think people don't always realize, like, I love what you said, like you're gaining experience along the way. And like I said, I kind of consider myself a skill gatherer, because even when I've had careers and jobs that weren't necessarily relevant to what I do now in terms of what people may see on the surface, all of this experience, all of these skills, and the way that I kind of put myself out there were kind of what put me here. And you may have heard me mention in my intro, right? Like I wrote this job description and handed it to the head of HR, which is, you know, maybe not what everybody is willing to do, but that's me. It was very on brand for my personality, which is one of my core values in life is to be bold. And so I have these 4 different core values, and one of them is boldness. And that was a bold move for me to figure out how did I use my experience and use all of these different things in a way that could be really beneficial for not just myself, but to have an impact on the company and for other people who look like me or who are experiencing things that made them perhaps feel othered, or that they didn't have a sense of belonging within their organization. So with that, you know, I want to talk about skills and experience a little bit more. And I mean, the 3 of you all have, you know, similar but different roles and experience. So Javier, I'd love to start with you and ask you a little bit about, you know, what do you think if somebody was to say, like, I'm going to take your job, Javier, see you later. What are 3 skills or experiences that you think someone would need in order to come and take your job? And tell us a little bit about kind of what your day-to-day is.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for that question. Thanks for asking me that and putting me on the spot first. So I'll go. So right now I've recently transitioned into a new team. Similar role, but a new team. So I was in the technical recruiting team, and now I'm on the diversity, inclusion, and belonging talent acquisition team, which is very similar. Talent acquisition, programs, and partnerships team. So my team consists of recruiters and program and partnership managers. So I'm on the recruiting side. So I'm still doing the day-to-day recruiting type of role, but my role is now very focused on organizations within my company that are lacking in diversity, right? In representation in their organization. So I focus on recruiting for those specific teams within my company. And as far as recruiting, like, to be honest, anybody that have recruiting experience can actually do my job. But going back to what Brandi mentioned, you got to have the passion for DEI. DEI is something bigger than yourself. It's something bigger than just your company. It's actually, it manifests in the community. It manifests in the broader society, right? Like what happens microly at a micro level at your company has macro impacts and intended and or unintended consequences outside of your company, right? So you got to have passion, right? Like I can train a recruiter in a year and be them really good recruiters within a year, right? but if they don't have the passion for doing this work, for like really understanding, to engage the stakeholders in your company, or to engage the partners in these programs and partnerships, then if you don't have that passion, and you're not willing to admit that what you don't know, you have to be able to have passion, but also be humble about what you don't know, so that you can continue to learn on your journey, right? So first is passion. Second is being humble. Humble that, hey, I don't know, but I want to grow, because this is something I want to strive for. I aspire to be part of the mission, to be part of the bigger picture, right? To be part of, some people will say revolution, but let's just call it the movement, right? To be part of the movement, right? so passion, being humble. To be honest, it's a lot of soft skills. It's a lot of soft skills, building bridges, right? Building bridges with people to change mindsets, to influence mindsets, to get them activated, to be more thinking about having a growth mindset and what it means to have a growth mindset in this work, right? Because if you're only thinking about your scope of work all the time, whatever role you're in, you don't have to be a recruiter to do DEI work, by the way. You don't have to be in HR to do DEI work. You can be a program manager, you can be in whatever role, but if you come from in your role as a lens with the DEI lens, right? And there's a lot of terms what DEI means, but you will be able to do a lot more research. I think Andrea is going to send out more resources for you all. But when you approach your role in a DEI lens, right, whether you're an interviewer on the panel, whether you're just giving some advice to folks that are underrepresented, doesn't matter what your role is, right? You don't need a DEI title to do this type of work, right? We only have these DEI titles because the work hasn't been done. That's why you see us on this stage, right? Like I can go back to being a regular recruiter without this title, right? so we can go back to doing certain things we want. I mean, not that we're not passionate on doing, but we can do other things that we're just as passionate about without this title, right? So don't get fixated about this title. Just continue your passion, continue to be humble, and continue to practice how to best build bridges. Because like I said earlier, it takes intersectional action for us to move the needle and to continue this movement. We can't do it alone within our own communities. So that's what I'll leave with you all.
I love that. I love it. No, that's so great. I tell people all the time, I'm like, in like an ideal world, this job no longer exists. Like that would be great. I don't think that's quite realistic right now. I may be in our time, but I mean, that's the ideal state, that it is so embedded into everything that happens and that everybody has this lens that they're doing their work through. And so I love that point that you made. Like, it doesn't matter if you don't have the D&I title, you still should be looking at this work and what are you doing through that lens of diversity, through the lens of equity, and through the lens of inclusion and belonging and all of the other, terms that are in. I love the ideas. I'm starting to hear more people say, I like vibes. There's a lot of different terms. So thank you for that. I really appreciate it. So yeah, Rona, I'll ask you the same question in terms of kind of what you're doing right now. What are a couple of skills or experience that you think would be really valuable for someone who would be doing your job? And tell us a little bit about, like, what does your day-to-day look like?
Sure. Well, my job is, my title is Diversity and Inclusion Program Manager. And so I have many different parts of my job, as I'm sure anybody does. One of the areas of focus is around enabling people to take on diversity projects. So, for example, we have a cross-functional team that's working on diversity, inclusion, and belonging. So to help lead that team across the HR organization, to enable everyone else to be taking actions together, tracking all of our progress across these areas. I manage our employee resource groups. We have 13 of them globally. I also manage our trainings. I also have a space platform for the whole company to come together called Dolby Together on Microsoft Teams, and that's where we do a lot of our trainings. We do a lot of like virtual belonging, especially since going to a pandemic virtual workplace, to create belonging and highlight diverse voices there. We also work with our executives and we look at our workforce data to see, where are our areas of focus, what actions can we take. I think I'll stop there in terms of, those are some highlights. I guess I'll say also as well as like employee communications in general about this work. I'm seeing can you speak louder? So I'm leaning forward. So in terms of some of the top 3 skills that I would recommend somebody have in this area, I will echo everything that was said ahead of me so well. But where I want to start is to talk about thinking strategically. So having a strategic mindset means to me, there are so many priorities in this work. As Andrea said, this job is not going away anytime soon. So that's something I get to think about every single day, where I'm like, all right, if I have 10 areas that I want to work on, how much time should I put on each one? Where's the long game at? How do I maybe have somebody else, like who else can I enable to actually be the support person for this project so that they have the support they need, and I can sort of focus on, the higher level of sort of like organizing and, moving towards the greater vision. So that's the first one, is I'd say thinking strategically. The second one is kind of what I'm calling program management, but that speaks a little bit to my first point around understanding what makes programs successful. And a lot of that is about the enablement piece that I just mentioned. So actually, when I think, for example, someone comes to me, let's say it's an employee resource group or anyone else who's working on a project, I used to think about, okay, like what is their objective? How do I help them better reach their objective? What is an obstacle that maybe they don't see that I can help them to overcome? What is, who's an ally that I can set them up with, whether it's, an executive or a partner or something else? What are measuring success? So anyway, those kinds of things where there's sort of like understanding how a program can be successful and the ability to coach other people to basically create those programs and bring them forward in the company based on their own vision. And I call it kind of like, I have this image of like, I go like kind of blowing on the ember of the fire that's already within this person, which leads to the third skill for me, which is about relationship building. Similar to what others have said moments ago about passion, there's this piece of it where it's passion, where you can actually connect with people on this topic. And the other piece that I want to bring into the relationship building is about empathy. So every single person you talk to who might, no matter where they're coming from in the world, they love what you're doing, they hate what you're doing, they want to do it this way, they think we should be doing that. There's all of these people that you get to learn from. And to create culture change, there's that importance of connecting with people to bring them along in the journey. So along with that goes, influence, especially with leaders across the company, or sort of finding even people who are not leaders, anyone who's sort of like a change maker or someone who, has a wide network in the company, to be able to align with those people and see how you can use that relationship to collaborate. And I use the word co-creation a lot. So that's probably one theme that would go throughout all of those 3 skills that I just mentioned.
Oh, that is awesome. And I feel like you gave Brandi probably a really great segue, because I love one of the things you mentioned, which is strategy. And I think it's so easy to think about D&I work as very initiative-based or programmatic, and not necessarily realize that it does require a strategy in order to be successful, in order for us to meet certain goals, in order for us to be successful, right? Like there needs to be something that we're working towards and trying to achieve. And so I love that. And I love that program management mindset. It all really just goes together so nicely. So thank you for that. So with that, Brandi, come on and tell us a little bit about the skills that you think that someone would need to be in your role, and tell us about the role. And I know you're in a really new role as well. And so tell us all about that.
So I am a whopping 60 days in, people. 60 days in. And I just have to say, you all are so fly. My panelists are just so fly, because I would love to have you on my team. You are just amazing. But to echo what Rona said, one of the things that I learned very on in my career is that you gotta have strong business acumen. You have to. Every job that I go into, even when I was a recruiter, I had to understand the business and understand how the business made money. If you understand the inputs and the outputs, you can go far in any role that you have. And that is why people can go from engineering then they'll jump from engineering and they go to sales, then they go from sales to procurement, and you're like, how do you do that? That's because they understand the actual function of the role. If you understand that, then you could take the diversity and you could overlay on it, and you come to them with D&I from a business standpoint. And for me, that's how I got the role that I have. That's how I've been extremely impactful in my roles, because I take it from a business standpoint. And I do want to say, because I see a lot of people in the chat who necessarily don't have a lot of D&I experience, I will tell you, I came from a team of 6 at Wells Fargo. All of us were heads of D&I for our functional business units. Only 2 of us had actual diversity backgrounds. Everybody else came from the business. So there's hope. I want to say that. The second thing I would say is that, and Rona alluded to this, you've got to have influence. You have to be able to talk to people, because most of the roles that we're really in consultative roles. So we're not in the roles where we can say, you have to do this. You have to show people why it's important. You have to show them the value. And I'll give you an example of how you do that, because I like to do that. So we talk about scorecards, we talk about numbers, and I tell people, I would sit down with my business leaders and I would say, I am more than a number. I am more than this graph that you see on this page. I have emotion. How are you going to reach me? So it's having those discussions to say, okay, how can we think a little bit broader outside of the box, taking the numbers out of it, how you talk to people, how you communicate with people. So having those types of conversations and let people understand that I'm a real person with real issues and there's different dimensions to who I am. I think that's something that helps too. That's your influence. And the last thing I would probably say is the relationship building. And I know you all hear this a lot, and I hate to repeat it, but it is absolutely true. Every job that I've gotten, except the one that I have now, I've gotten because of people knew my work and they knew me from industry, and it was a relationship thing. However, when I interviewed with my CEO, I told him, I said, Google me, check the receipts. If you want to know my work, you can find out. You could call people, call the leader that I support, because I knew they sort of knew each other. So being able to build those relationships, being able to pick up the phone and say, hey, I need help with this. This is what help looks like for me. When we get in this boardroom tomorrow, and when I present this program and I talk about how it's going to work and it's going to scale across the business, what support looks like for me is for you to then say, Brandi, I think this is a great idea, and this is how it's going to help my business move the needle. That is what support looks like. That is what a good relationship looks like. If I did not have good relationships, I would not be able to make those calls. I built the relationships by learning the business. I'll say that again. I built the relationships by learning the business. I start a job and I go in and I say, hey, we're not even going to talk about D&I. We're going to talk about what you do. And I want to know how your business makes money and how do you meet your goals. And doing that, I think, got people to trust me, and it helped me to move the needle on a little bit faster. Now, Andrea, I was talking so much, I forgot the second part of the question. What was the second part of the question?
No, that was good. I think you answered it all,
Oh,
which is, some of the skills and what do you do? I think you got it all in there.
Okay.
And so you kind of started to allude to something. So I want to stick with you for a second, Brandi, because I see a question that came up in the chat, and you mentioned something near and dear to my heart, which are scorecards. Yes. And so someone was asking, how do you measure success? And, I think metrics are very important, right? You can't change what you don't measure. I talk about that a lot in my work with Catalyst as well, and helping other organizations think about that. And you said it, and I love this, is that people aren't just numbers, like we are. And I think that oftentimes the human element sometimes get lost in terms of that, but it's still really important to look at those numbers. So can you tell me a little bit about how do you find that balance between, the metrics driven approach and the human approach to the work that we do?
I'm going to tell you how I loop it all together. And I always say this for those of you that ever have had experience with me, and I call it my 33 and a third mantra. And I'll explain why. But Javier can work to bring people into the organization. He can lead a fish to water. But if the culture does not support them to stay, they will leave. They're going to leave. So when I think about metrics, I look at it as 3 parts, and these are all equally as important. This is how I get to the human element. So you have the attract, how you bring people in, I look at the recruitment numbers. I look at the slate, like who's getting interviewed, who's actually getting hired. But for me, what's really important is what about the people that we actually have who are already in the company, right? Those people are just as important as everybody else because they feel left out. And it's like, okay, diversity is new, Black Lives Matter happened, and now everybody wants to have Black people. Now everybody is Heritage Month. Everybody wants to hire whichever Heritage Month there is. But what about me? And I'm here and I've been doing the work. How do you retain the people that you have? And that's what I mean about the human element of it. And that's where Rona comes in. And it's doing those programs. It's creating those sponsorship programs. It's putting them in ERGs. It's looking at the tracking of those to see how many people are actually being engaged in those. It's looking at how many executives are actually being sponsors of those actual ERGs. It's looking at how many people are actually promoting into the roles that are already in the seats, right? And then the last thing, human element, is I talked about attract, develop, and retain. It's really more so to retain. I actually look at people who leave. I look at my attrition because I really want to know why people are leaving. And a lot of times I could actually stop it if I have the conversation, but if all those things if all those things are not in place, they are going to leave. And that's sitting down and having a conversation to say, okay, what's the root cause? What's the systemic thing of what's going on so we can sort of fix that? And I can stop you from leaving. And then once I fix that, I can sort of cater my programming and cater my scorecard to getting you to stay here and to also get you to actually promote. So I look at attrition, I look at who's promoting up within the business. I look at the levels of how they're actually moving, because all of you that have been doing this work, you all know that diversity is mostly in the bottom areas of the organization. The higher you get up, the pull through seems to cease. So where are the people going? I look at things like that on my scorecard. And then also there are some things that you really can't measure, and that's sort of how people feel. And for that, I look at the culture survey. So I'm actually getting ready to launch that at my job right now. And there's a question that everybody asks on the survey. You all have answered it on the line. And it's, would you recommend a friend to work here? Y'all, that's very telling, because nobody's gonna bring anybody into the grease. You're not gonna leave the frying pan to go in the hot grease, is what my big mama used to say. So that's very telling about the culture that you have to create. So with my role, actually, Andrea, I don't think you know this. You may or may not know this. You may have discussed it. So even though I'm head of diversity, equity, and inclusion, I'm also responsible for culture, because it goes hand in hand. And
Absolutely.
you can't have a good workplace without having culture to support the workplace that you're actually in. And then for me, my role is global. So when you think about the international standpoint, they don't really see race the same way as we do in the US. It's more about culture, engagement, gender, and other things that you can't see, like who we actually are. So that's when the scorecard gets a little bit different, and I'm actually working on that right now. I don't have an answer for that all the way, but I have some.
No, I think that's great. And Javier and Rona, feel free to chime in as well in terms of having a discussion around success and metrics. But I think having those surveys, getting people's opinions, looking at exit interviews, all of those things go into understanding what is happening within your organization. There's so many different things that we look at and we track as we're doing this work. We're looking at, are you having diverse slates? What does that look like? Are you actually, is your team making the effort to bring in people from diverse backgrounds in order to actually help to move the needle? But I think that focus that Brandi talked about around culture and inclusion is so important and often doesn't get the same attention as the D in DEI. It's people run towards the numbers and increasing them by doing the recruiting efforts. But in order to do that, and what she mentioned was what I call the NPS score, is that net promoter score. Will you invite someone else and tell them to come along and be here with you? We want to see the people stay and then add to it. That's how you build. That's how you really increase those numbers. Because if every time you hire a person of color or someone else from an underrepresented community and they are running out the door, you can add all day, but it won't add up to much. Rona, I saw you came off. Did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, thanks. So yeah, I think Brandi gave a really good overview of sort of like, we look at the whole life cycle of our employees, and also but before that, our job candidates, and before that, who are the pipeline of early talent who aren't even ready to come into the workforce yet, and how do we support more underrepresented folks to come into what we call our talent pipeline so they could become a candidate. But the part I actually more so wanted to speak to is two other things, which is in this work, the numbers are so important, as you just said, Andrea, as well. At the same time, the numbers can be really demotivating. If you look at any company that has been, in the last years, showing what their workforce demographic percentages are, it doesn't always look great, and the progress doesn't always feel great. But what I think is important about tracking to add to that is I kind of think of it as input versus output. So to me, output is, did the percentage of X person change, or is the X type of person being promoted more often? That's kind of the output of what all of your efforts do, but also to track the input. So for example, if you have an internship program and you've added relationships with 5 HBCUs this year, that's something that maybe doesn't pay off this year in your internship numbers in terms of how many folks of African descent or Black folks are coming in as interns. But next year you will maybe see that bump, or maybe in 2 years, or so a lot of this work is very long term. So I think it's important to track the input of all the efforts across the company that are going in that will just take time to mature. And the other piece I wanted to put in was noticing culture change in various moments. So what I'm noticing is like, how are employees talking about diversity? How often are they talking about it? And in what platforms? So I've noticed just a huge increase in the quantity and volume of people who are speaking out about it, how much they share about themselves, and the amount of authenticity, which is a big part of belonging, that people are willing to share. And that's something that I'm super, super proud of and being able to see, because to me, those are like the seeds, or it's kind of, again, back to my point about enablement. It's like, oh, like the motor is growing of people who are a part of this. And therefore, it's about that progress to become more and more exponential as you get people, engaged and understanding, and then being able to act on their own.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I love it. There are so many questions that are popping in, and thank you all for all of these really great questions. One I do want to just address, and I talk about this more, as I mentioned, I do have a business, AGT Diversity Consulting. You can find me at andreagtatum.com. And I do have an online course where I talk a lot about some of the things that we're discussing today. And I saw one question come up around kind of the business case for this work, the DEI work, and having to convince senior leadership or having to convince people. And I'll be the first to admit, I'm familiar, right? Like, what are the business cases? Oh, it increases, innovation. It's the right thing to do. It's a business imperative, right? Like, we know the script in terms of what the business case is. And it's one of those things, it's like, you learn to kind of meet people where they are. And some people, leaders, need that convincing, and it's incredibly frustrating. Like, I'm going to be frank in this conversation, like having to convince people that this work is necessary is exhausting, and it's tiring, because you don't always get asked kind of similar questions when it comes to other things. But I think it is important to understand those business cases. And I think they're evolving. And that's the thing about this work. It is constantly evolving. The business cases are evolving, the numbers are evolving, language is constantly evolving. And so, it is hard to have to constantly convince people. I think we're seeing a shift in terms of that since last summer, and that people are starting to become more aware of why this work is so important. But it is still really hard. And yes, we are still having to convince people it's the right things to do. And I mean, like I said, I can speak personally that it's incredibly frustrating, but it is part of the job. But you're trying to convince people of it. Again, it's the human element, and not just that tick box of we're doing it to say we're doing it. So I did want to address that question that came up. And so, Javier, I want to talk a little bit more about you and your team, and thinking about how do you bring people along when you're thinking about hiring managers and other folks. There's always kind of this need for speed when it comes to hiring. So can you tell me a little bit about how do you approach that need to get people into these roles versus taking the time to really fully think about what needs to happen in order to increase diversity within organizations?
Yeah, man, this is like a huge question and topic. I think I'm gonna try to dissect it in many different ways, or as represented as I can. So, you know, sometimes it does, you know, as smaller companies, it may take grassroots efforts, right? It might take more efforts from the individual contributors to present the value of diversity. But there are also opportunities at bigger companies like mine, or more mid-sized companies, that, I mean, everything, at least I think in tech, a lot of companies in tech that is a global tech company, right? Their diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy has really accelerated, right? Because of everything that happened last summer, and that's still continuing happening now. So I know someone said meet them where they are, right? And then we talked about that. But I think sometimes it's partnering and activating the leaders in these organizations. And it doesn't mean you might get all the executives buy in at once, right? What it does mean is that, you know, you start where you can influence. You influence one layer, one level, and you still build it up, right? For us at ServiceNow, we started with our employee belonging groups. Our diverse DEI team met with executives, you know, and asked them like, hey, you know, how are you feeling? And you know, we connected with them, and they connected with, you know, especially the communities that were most vulnerable at the time, the Black community at our company, right? And the Black community addressed their concerns, addressed how they felt, right? The executives had empathy to listen and to try to meet our communities of color, employees of color, where they are, right? So it is like a two-way street, right? But it's unfortunate that it took the events of this past summer to happen, especially, you know, tragedy of many folks this past summer. But something started, right? There's a movement starting. It's continuing to grow. So part of it, you know, like very practical, is we got to hear out each other's stories, empathetic listening. It starts with that. And then from there, now they got to workshop through what they have to do for their organization, right? For their specific org. It might not be a company-wide thing. It might start with some things, but we establish our employee belonging groups, and that we have, you know, executives and executives -1, so your SVPs, as part of the co-exec sponsors of these employee belonging groups, and we go through training together. We meet on a monthly or quarterly basis, right? So that they are in tune with what's going on in the community. So we got to, especially in these times, we're working digitally, we're all remote. Like, now we got to think how we can engage our employees, our mid-level managers, and our senior leadership on this topic, right? Or on this movement. So I think we're still all learning, because this is the first time for many companies, especially if the company never had ERGs before, a really thorough program, to go through this during a pandemic, right? It's like easier said than done, what I'm saying right now, but it's not, right? This work is hard, like you were mentioning, Andrea. It's hard convincing up. It's hard. It's a lot of emotional labor on this uphill battle. And if you want to do this work, this is what it takes, right? This is what it takes to dismantle a lot of structural inequities we have in society, right? So think of it from that macro perspective when we're thinking about the work you are passionate about doing, if you're passionate about doing this, right? Because it is going to be emotionally draining at times. But at times it's emotionally rewarding, because once you see the allyship being practiced for your community or for the company, for the people that are most underrepresented, that's the emotional reward part that that you get to see, yeah, you get to experience, because it comes in waves, right? So that practically it's hard. It's like, what are we gonna do? We're in a digital environment. Like, we can't like meet face to face all the time. There's limited capabilities of establishing and nurturing those physical relationships. But what we can do is tell our stories and hopefully get leadership to be activated, and then set goals, right? Set aspirational goals, and that's, at least we can start with that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Javier. I love that. I mean, I cannot believe we are already coming up on time for this. And so a couple of quick things. One, I, of course, just want to thank my panelists for being a part of this today, for sharing their stories, sharing their journey, sharing their experience. I do see that we weren't able to get to all of the questions in the chat. Some of them, though, several of them, I do want to let you all know that I would love to work with you all. Those of you all who are thinking about, what does it mean for me to get into this work and transition my career from whether it's being an engineer or being in different fields? What we've really tried to communicate is that, like, there's all these different valuable skills and experience that you can bring to this work, but it's about really understanding the value that you bring to the organizations that you're going to work with and helping them to see that value. And that's something that I do. And so you can connect with me. I have my Intro to DEI Careers course that you can take online, on demand. It's an hour-long course, but it provides over 8 hours of additional resources, links to things that you can read, that you can watch, that you can take additional trainings. And so for those of you who are like, whether or not I should be taking one of the more expensive courses, I don't say not to take them, but I recommend taking this just as a way to kind of figure out if this is something you want to deep dive into. It has a workbook to help you think about your experiences and your hard and soft skills. Javier talked about those soft skills that are so important, and how do you translate them into your resume? And so in my DEI career advisory sessions, I do a lot of work with people to talk about, how do you transform your resume into a way that you are able to highlight the different skills and experiences that you have, so that you're able to think about that. So this is the way that you can connect with me. And in the last 2 minutes, and for those of you all who are on YouTube, just in case you are not a part of my mailing list, if you will, I would also love your feedback. So you can take a screenshot or just use your camera to take a photo of this little survey. But with the last 2 minutes that we have, I would love to just quickly, in 1 or 2 words from all of my panelists. This work is deeply personal, and many of us have alluded to that. How do you protect your peace? Because this is a lot. It can be a lot. And so for me, I protect my peace in doing this work. I started going to therapy because I realized that I was also kind of having to be a therapist for other people in doing this work. So Rona, I'll start with you. And in 2 or 3 words, how do you protect your peace in this work?
I echo that about self-care, therapy, make sure you receive coaching, receive the programs that you give to others, and also deal with your own belonging and understand that you get to win as well.
Love that. Javier?
Wow, I would echo what Ronan and you just said. I just started therapy again too, so thank you both for being vulnerable with that. And for me, it's finding community, whatever form you can find community in during these times. It can be community within your at work, with your friends, or a platform like Clubhouse or whatever platform y'all use for building community. Because right now it's hard to have physical community, but there are other ways to get engaged, to get some fulfilling wellness for yourself. And sometimes that comes in the form of community, whatever community means to you.
I love that. And Brandi, last words. How do you protect your peace in doing this work?
I say no, and I Netflix binge, and I don't let anybody let me feel guilty about it.
I love that. I love a good Netflix binge. I am way too deep into too many K-dramas right now. So I love that. Thank you all again, Javier, Rona, and Brandi. Thank you to all of you all who took time. I see you all on YouTube. Thank you all for registering and joining this course. Be sure that you are a part of my email list. Go to AndreaGTatum.com. You can join that email list. I will be sending out the recording of this as well. And you can get more information about everything that I talked about, the DEI career advisory sessions and the online course, all on AndreaGTatum.com. So thank you all so much. I really